Okay, friends, this is Seth Itzcan of Soil4Climate, and we are today with Dr. David Johnson and his science collaborator and wife, Hui-Chun Su Johnson. And we're very excited to have them today, and we're very excited to have you all here joining us in this session. I am going to do a brief formal introduction of Dr. Johnson, and then I'll do my informal introduction. But the formal introduction is a doozy, and he warrants it. Dr. Johnson is a molecular biologist at New Mexico State University and has collaborated with Peter Byck at Arizona State University, Richard Teague at Texas A&M Agrilife Center, and the United States Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. His work explores paths to improve food security, reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide, and increase productivity and profitability through the development of beneficial microbial communities in farm and rangeland soils. Dr. Johnson is a co-inventor with his science collaborator and wife, Hui-Chun Su Johnson, of the Johnson-Su Composting Bioreactor. The invention allows for more biologically enhanced compost at much less the cost and energy requirement of conventional methods. By providing a non-disruptive aeration system, fungal communities can thrive, resulting in higher soil fertility and crop yields once applied. Additionally, Dr. Johnson is lead author of a breakthrough paper in PeerJ scientific journal titled Adaptive Multi-Paddock Grazing Management's Influence on Soil Food Web Community Structure for Increasing Pasture Forage Production, Soil Organic Carbon, and Reducing Soil Respiration Rates in Southeastern USA Ranches. How's that for a title? Wow. Okay. All right. Wait, but there's more. This paper finds that adaptive multi-paddock or AMP grazing, a common academic terminology for holistic planned grazing, outperformed conventional grazing systems in numerous important measures, including standing crop biomass, pasture photosynthetic capacity, fungal to bacterial ratio, soil carbon accrual, and CO2 respiration reduction. In fact, regarding the latter two measures, Dr. Johnson's research shows if AMP grazing were applied on grasslands and savannas globally, the net yearly atmospheric CO2 load would be reduced by about 6.6 billion tons, or 18% of the total. Well, there you go. There's the formal introduction for Dr. Johnson.
And you got through it, Sam.
I got through it, but it was worth it. Carl, your hand is up. Did you want to say something?
I was hoping you would introduce me.
Oh, okay. And of course, Soil4Climate colleague and the silent smart one in the background, Carl Tiedemann. None of this would be possible without him. Okay, Dr. Johnson, the floor is yours. Thank you for allowing me to do such a formal introduction, but it really is warranted in your case, and we really are very honored to have you here today.
Well, thank you, and I guess a happy birthday is in order, right?
Absolutely.
How many years is it?
Thank you. Today is our 5th year as an IRS recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization.
We should have our party hats on.
Yes,
Yeah, we should have our party hats on. Oh, and speaking of hats, let me sort of informally do the ritual here of providing you virtually with a Soil4Climate hat, which we do for all our speakers. So there it is. Well,
I'll go long if you throw it.
It didn't really work with the virtual background, but anyway, you get the point. All right, Dr. Johnson, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
I guess you'd like me to go ahead and do the presentation first then?
Oh, yes. So Dr. Johnson will do about a 10-minute presentation, then we'll open discussion, and you can ask questions through the chat area.
Just want to check. You can see my screen, correct?
Yes, I see it. Yeah.
Well, what I'd like to talk to you about today is a BEAM approach to agriculture, a biologically enhanced agricultural management system. This is a journey that you'll be taking. And first thing you need to realize that microbes are the backbone of every organism and ecosystem on this planet. So they're extremely critical for all life processes. In the BEAM approach, it includes no or reduced chemical inputs or disturbance from tillage, year-round living roots from full-time ground cover so that you're feeding these microbes, and either implementation of livestock using adaptive multi-paddock grazing or holistic management, or inoculation with beneficial microbes. First, we look at how nature built the soils. This started in the Great Plains about 53 million years ago with the bison. They were kept in tight herds by the wolves. They were moved along regularly. They only grazed about 40% of the forage that was available. The rest of it, they trampled into the ground. They would deposit their dung and urine. The dung would be rolled up into balls by dung beetles, placed in the soil where it would basically compost in place. It's ideal conditions, moisture content, temperature. It was basically an inoculation event. As these bison moved across the prairies, they would inoculate these soils with microbes from the dung and the urine and the composting of that dung underground. We did a project with Peter Byck, Carbon Nation, looking at adaptive multi-paddock grazing versus continuous grazing in 5 pairs of ranches in the Southeast, in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. What we observed in this is that the AMP systems, you're able to have 2.16 times higher carrying capacity, more animals per hectare than the conventional systems. We also noticed that forage biomass was 46% higher, as you can see here, in the AMP systems compared to the conventional systems. We also noticed that soil respiration was about 18% lower in AMP systems compared to conventional. And soil organic carbon, we saw a 21% increase in soil carbon percent. When you start to look at this influence on the 1.25 billion hectares of savannas and grasslands, that increase in forage biomass will actually pull down 9.82 billion tons of CO2 per year. The reduction in soil respiration would keep 6.6 billion tons of CO2 per year out of the atmosphere. And the soil organic carbon increase would yield about 2.34 billion tons of CO2 per year. Cumulatively, these are about 18 billion tons of CO2, which is about half our current fossil fuel emission rate. When we looked at the biology in these systems, now in these graphs, the green circles are the AMP systems, as you can see here. The yellow triangles are the CG, or the continuous grazing. You'll notice in the productivity, always on the y-axis here on the left, of the forage production increasing. We saw as forage increased, we noticed there was a reduction in the number of bacteria in the system. As you increase forage production and for the fungal biomass, you see an increasing. The more fungal biomass in the system, the higher the productivity. So your fungal to bacterial ratio is very predictive of the production in these systems. However, you see in the yellow triangles, the continuous grazing, it's chaos. It's all disrupted because of the addition of fertilizers, the overgrazing and grazing down to the ground level of the forage. The spraying.
Excuse me, David, I apologize for interrupting. There is a black rectangle at the top of your screen that's blocking the titles for the various graphs. I don't know if that's something you can maybe move to the side or close.
You know, that's always been a problem. Never been able to figure out how to get rid of that triangle.
Okay, thank you. All right.
No data up there. So we also did a soil food web proxy. That was an assessment of all the microbes, all the protozoa, and the nematodes in the system. And you can see as the soil food web proxy, you had more and more biomass of these organisms. You see an increase in forage production in these systems. We also noticed that predator-prey relationships. On the left-hand side here is the AMP systems. On the right-hand side is the continuous grazing. You can see that as the protozoa populations increased, as you increase standing crop biomass, you see a decrease in the bacterial biomass. So you're starting to see a system that's functioning properly. It's cycling the nutrients. The protozoa are eating the bacteria, releasing nitrogen and other elemental nutrients, and feeding the plants. In CG systems on the right, there is no correlation. It's very disruptive. As I say, it's a chaotic system. Some people say, well, you can do that in the Southeast, but you can't do it in places like the Chihuahua Desert. And yet Alejandro Carrillo has been working with his dad's land about a decade. When he got it, he was doing about 250 acres to support one cow. He now has it that he can support one cow with 20 acres. He completely changed, or let me say, he completely reverted this back to a grassland, because this used to be grasslands before the Spaniards came in with the cattle, and then the sheep after that, and then goats after that, where they just desertified this whole area. And yet previous to that, there were grasslands belly high to a horse. Well, if you don't have the cattle or the bison to do this, we have an alternate way to be able to restore the biology in your soils. And it's with the Johnson-Su Bioreactor. It's a very simple system. It's built on a pallet. We use landscape cloth and a wire cage to hold it together. There's about 6 holes in the bottom. You have these pipes that go up through the center. So as you fill it, you have a airflow up to the center of the system, and the pipes are pulled out about 24 hours after you build it. So you always, it's an aerobic system. You irrigate it about once a day, about 1.5 gallons, and that keeps it about 70% moisture content. There's no turning to the system. It's always aerobic since you have the 6 air columns up through the pile. We kind of want to emphasize, you do not want to let it freeze or dry out. You'll have to rebuild it because you will disrupt the system. This is a vermicomposting process. So we add worms after the temperature goes below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It does take 1 year to reach maturity, but as you reach this maturity, you see a quadrupling of the diversity of microbes in the system. So we recommend to follow the instructions closely on the first try, no shortcuts. After that, you're welcome to do it however you want, but if you want a good compost that is effective at bringing the microbes back to your soil, this is a good way to do it. Now, what do these microbes do for you? Well, we found at least 23 different nitrogen fixtures, both symbiotic and free living. They solubilize phosphorus. You have probably in your soils 60 to 80 years of phosphorus. It's just locked up because of the soil physical chemistry. These microbes can free it up for you. Microbes that also oxidize elemental metals from the parent material, soil parent material. We also see phytohormone production, carbon and nitrogen cycling, which is extremely critical in these systems, that you're cycling all these nutrients. But one thing that really popped out was quorum sensing. And this is where a group of microbes can work together and express genes as a community that they can't as individual organisms. And we saw about a 10 times increase in quorum sensing after the addition of these microbes. So when we did some preliminary experiments, we looked at making an extract and injecting it into the furrow at planting, like here on the right. We also used the extract and sprayed it on top of the soil. Watered both of these immediately, and you can see the difference in the growth. We saw over a doubling of growth when you injected it in the soil when compared to a topical application. We also saw in the spring cover crop on a larger field, inoculation into the furrow produced over twice, and also a fall biomass production. On the right, you can see the difference between a plant reaching reproductive maturity and not, depending on whether it was injected with the extract into the furrow or placed on the ground on the top. This is a farmer in Belgium. He tried the same thing. He seed coats He would coat the seed with his compost. He saw a doubling as well. So we see that this is relatively effective on the cover crops, restoring and rebuilding the soil biology in your fields. This is after about 40 years of cover cropping, implementing cover crop or regular commodity crops of cotton and chili in our area. These crops have the maximum productivity without using any fertilizers, both in cotton and in chili. We also have a product with Stella McCartney in Turkey, helping them with their cotton production, getting an organic cotton for them. They have come in with the cover crops and injection of the microbes to rebuild that soil microbiology, and they roll the cover crops and plant the cotton into it. Now, normally, this is how many trips they have about 24 trips across this field for either herbicide, pesticides, fertilizer, or weeding. And we changed this we were able to reduce the fertilizer by 85% with no yield impact. In fact, the yields were better in the cotton fields in the 85% than the ones that received 100%. The yields were about 4.2 metric tons of cotton per hectare, or 3,748 pounds per acre. The crops did well despite they only had 2 irrigation bills. The no herbicides were used due to good weed suppression from the cover crop. They had 100% displacement. They observed biodiversity in their soil that they had not seen since their childhood. And they've now taken this method to Romania for grain and oilseed crop production. Russell Hedrick, he implements cows and sheep and pigs on his. He does commodity cropping and always has a crop in the field, either cover or commodity. He's able to reduce his fertilizer by 80%. He has stopped using fungicides and pesticides for the last 6 years. His corn production is about 185 bushels per acre compared to the county average of 110. He's been doing this for about a decade. He's rebuilt the soil biology and the soil carbon in his system. They had a drought in 2015. He averaged 128 bushels of corn per acre, where the county average was only 9. So there were a lot of farmers coming to see Russell after they saw his crop come in at 128 and theirs was basically a failure. A lot of people say, can you do this on large acreage? Well, the Haggertys in Australia, they inject at a very similar rate. It's about 2 pounds of compost per acre is what they're putting down. And they do about 20,000 hectares. They grow barley, and they do about 3 tons of barley per hectare in a region that gets 1.5 to 1.6 tons of barley per hectare conventionally. You can see on the right the buildup of the soil microbes sheaths around the roots in these systems. These plants have just barely sprouted. And the picture in the center is an interesting picture. They've already grown the barley and harvested it. As you can see, the stubble there. They got a late fall rain, and yet in nice, neat rows, exactly where they've injected the biology, they see a C4 grass that hadn't been seen in 4 decades in that area. So you don't know the power of the influence of biology for reawakening these seed banks in these systems. So my suggestion is to align yourself with nature. This is all about observation. You need to be able to look at your systems and figure out how nature is doing this and try to mimic her the best you can. And things work out really well as far as growing a crop.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Johnson.
That's the 10-minute version.
That's a 10-minute version of a life's work. There you go. Well, thank you so much. Again, we're really honored. I think maybe I'll ask a question, and then maybe Carl, and then questions are also coming in through Zoom. And I even want to confirm, can you see them on your end?
Yeah, I saw the one from Jim Stiles.
Okay. So let me.
That one I can't answer because that data hasn't been released by the funder yet.
Okay, sorry for that, Jim. You're just.
I'm sorry.
That's science, politics, bureaucracy. Okay.
Let's say it's good news. Okay, it's very similar to Russell. This does work. Is all I can say is, you start looking at the soil biology and restoring it, and focusing on that, as well as rebuilding that soil carbon, it's amazing what these soils can do.
Okay, that question, by the way, for other people who didn't see it, Jim was asking whether or not some data of the last 5 years, some other data could be released, and
we're in year 4 of that right now.
Yeah,
and we still lack another year and a half. Well,
right. So we'll get to it. It gives us something to look forward to.
Ed Bourgeois asked a question about the cold weather performance of the Johnson-Su Compost Bioreactor. And I just explained in a brief answer that Dr. Juan Alves at the University of Vermont is doing testing in a cold climate. And I suggested that possibly the bioreactor would need to be in a greenhouse in order to enable it to successfully overwinter. My understanding is it cannot freeze. Do you want to elaborate on that? Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, it is a vermicompost. And if the worms freeze, the whole system stops. And they're very important to this. And we have done some analysis on these composts, looked at compost here in the US and compost in Australia, and also 2 commercial products in Australia that are also vermicompost made with a proprietary method. And we have almost identical compost compared to ours and the ones in Australia and those commercial products. So it looks like there's a common endpoint in the composting process that nature takes it to, because it's identical both in the community members, the microbial community members, and also in the metatranscriptomics or the messenger RNA that are being transcribed. In a principal component analysis, they stack right on top of each other. So that means they're almost identical.
Now, Dr. Johnson, I had a question about one of your previous slides, and because of that strange artifact of that black bar there, I was even thinking maybe I'll bring it up on my end.
Okay.
So I'll do the screen share on my end. And then you can speak to the slide. Let me, everybody just give me a second here as I do my own screen share. And then we'll put this in presenter mode. Okay. All right, so this was slide 7 from your presentation.
Yes.
This was the one that I love the most because, as people know, oh, it's on auto advance. Oh, good heavens.
You can go back.
It's always something.
Change the timer on it. You're in presenter mode, so it'd be better if you went back to the get out of presenter and go back to the regular. It was a bigger picture.
Oh, okay, very good. Okay, all right, and show.
You go up into.
Okay, but you can still see this, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, everyone knows we're Soil4Climate, and obviously climate is much more than just carbon, but carbon and CO2 really are sort of, the bargaining chips of this conversation, frankly. So here you go. You've got 3 graphs on here, one on well, there's 4, but the 3 where you have a carbon then drawdown equivalent or a CO2 equivalent, one on forage biomass, one on CO2 respiration, and the other on, organic carbon in the soil. I wonder if you could just, for a couple more minutes, just spend a little more time on this slide particularly going over the biomass, the CO2 respiration, and the organic carbon, and help us understand how these particular numbers in terms of CO2 reduction are calculated. And I was also wondering, is the net input then, or is the net impact on climate the summation of all 3 of these, or how is that math done? Okay, so the ball is in your court. Thank you.
Okay, well, as you know, most of the carbon that we look at is in the soil. And that's what we do our estimates on. We're not looking at the very beginning of the system. If you're not going to be able to increase soil carbon unless you can increase forage biomass, increase the efficiency, the photosynthetic capacity of these systems. And this is what we noticed in the AMP systems. They were so much more productive because the biology was there working. So they're actually drawing down more CO2 out of the atmosphere. Most people don't look at respiration. And I had just seen this in some greenhouse work I had done, and also in some field studies that I'd done, to actually see as you improve the carbon in the soil and improve the biology of the system, that the respiration is actually lower. It's most people or most scientists are looking at this, that if you increase soil biology and increase soil carbon, it's linear. You're going to have increased respiration. This is not how nature works. You actually see an increase in the soil's ability to hold that carbon, not to respire it. So you asked if it's accumulative. It's somewhere in between. We don't give forage biomass much weight because we figure it's just going to degrade. But if you look at soils across the planet and look at the aging of the carbon in the soils, you always see younger carbon at the top, older carbon at the bottom. So that tells me that nature builds these soil layers, the soil up in layers. The forage that's left on the top of the ground, either through the grazing, the adaptive multi-paddock grazing, where you leave 60%, it's trampled. You're building a mass of organic material on top of that soil to protect it. Same thing happens in farming. We're seeing a buildup, the buildup of that cover to protect that soil. It's all going to be degrading, yes, but it's going to leave a certain amount of carbon on the top of that soil. It's going to be rebuilding soil depth. So you have to start to bring that into the picture. This is a system that we're working with. It's not just soil carbon. So having that decrease in soil respiration, and this is also the 18% I saw, is corroborated by, they're doing a full annual Met Tower study on these soils to see what kind of carbon respiration rates, and it actually saw a 20% reduction on their results in the AMP systems compared to conventional. So this is something that we really need to start pulling into this picture, that we're reducing respiration rate. That's 6.6 billion tons of CO2 per year. We're increasing forage biomass, we're increasing the productivity of these systems. You have over two times the number of animals that you can get on there. So you're actually pulling carbon into those organisms, and that's going to feed people. So soil organic carbon is the smallest of the three. When you're looking at the let's see, one more slide down, the 2.34 billion tons.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine, but it's, from my perspective, we need to look at it as a system. It's not just soil organic carbon. There's other components in this that are working. It's an efficiency that you're rebuilding this system to capture the carbon, to hold it in the soil, to not respire it, and to build up the soil carbon at the same time. We have to consider all of this, the impact of all of this. You know, you have your continuous grazing where their photosynthetic capacity is low, they have high respiration. That's not even considered in the picture. All they look at is soil organic carbon. So again, a system that we're trying to, understand how it works. It's a regenerative system that we're working on.
Okay, well, I definitely want to work with you on helping to promote, frankly, this slide, because I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but in our world, this is the money slide. This is the slide that's going to get the attention, frankly, of the United Nations and of policy people. And so we really need to push this forward. I'd be curious even to hear from other people out there in Zoom land or Facebook land, even what their thoughts are about this topic. That is the topic of what to promote. You know, there are so many important takeaways here, and you really have 30 seconds or 15 seconds of someone's attention. And what are you going to tell them? I guess it depends also on, well, who they are and what they care about. I guess if they care about crop yield, that's one thing. If they care about climate, they want to know about carbon. But, you know, the whole nitrogen thing, like what's going on in, you know, in the Netherlands now. You know, Carl spoke about that earlier before, that there should be a plan to help farmers get off of nitrogen fertilizer, not just a date. It says, okay, by this date, you need to be off. There should be this sort of phased plan, whereas they're phasing off the fertilizer, they're phasing in the bioreactor and the grazing and whatever. Feel free to comment on any of that or change the topic. I'm just sort of going off here, whatever. I'm going to stop the show. Oh,
The nitrogen is key in this as well, and we are seeing a restoration of nitrogen in those soils. You're rebuilding this system. You're not only rebuilding the carbon cycle, you're rebuilding the nitrogen cycle. And also water is all of these. There's just so many benefits to this approach.
Right. And there's only so much you can say in a paper, but all of these things, the water, the nitrogen, the carbon, the forage, runoff, you know, we need to make the case for all of that. Just really quickly, if I could also bring you to another slide, this one here. Can you say just a little more about this, about where is it and how long has it been under this practice?
This is in the Chihuahua Desert, just northern Mexico. It's just south of the border here, about 150 miles. And it's Alejandro Carrillo. He used to be a software engineer, and his dad pulled him back out to the farm, and he started taking care of the farm. And he started looking at things different. He wanted to be able to restore these grasslands. And with his adaptive multi-paddock grazing, also selection of the animals. You have to have the correct animals out there that can survive in this situation, that will graze on the plants. But he's been able to completely change this. Changing as far as the bird habitat, all the other organisms that inhabit that area, they're all doing much better. He's, as I say, from 250 acres to support 1 cow to 20 acres. How much change has he done? How much more carbon is he pulling out of the atmosphere by being able to grow those grasslands compared to the mesquite, and let's see, I think there's greasewood out there as well. You know, the photosynthetic capacity of that system is totally different and better. And he's seeing grasses up to his shoulder when he's on a horse out there. So these systems can be rebuilt. And along with that, you know, we have to consider, okay, it's pulling down more carbon. Don't have the picture in there, but there's a picture of where an arroyo eroded. And there's 3 foot of a soil A horizon out there that used to exist from the grasslands that used to be there. But now, you know, it's desertified. And it's the same thing here in New Mexico. You know, most of New Mexico has been desertified because of the grazing. But it can be restored, just like the picture in the back behind you, Seth.
Oh, right. Right. That's from Zimbabwe. Very similar situation.
This works everywhere.
Yeah. Do you know how many cows he has, Alejandro?
Oh, I do not now. No.
Okay. Well,
I think he's the 400 to 800 range, but he may have more by now.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to interview him as well. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm gonna end the show, and then let's just. But thank you for going into more detail on some of these slides.
Yes, you know, those were side by side across the fence line comparisons in the southeast. So they all got the same amount of sunlight, and they all got the same amount of rain. Just one system approach was able to do so much better with the resources that either fell on it or shined on it.
Hi. Okay, so I just ended the PowerPoint show. Let me see. Carl, do you want to add something here? You said Henry wants to make a comment.
Yes, we can bring Henry Swayze on. If you can unmute him, or I can do that, I think.
He may not be able to speak.
Allowed to talk. I can do it. Yep. All right, Henry, if you turn on your microphone on your end, you're live.
There we are. That should do it.
Excellent.
So these systems, you've done research both with in relationship to seed planting and putting the inoculants into the soil rows, and you've also demonstrated what happens when you are using animals to bring back desertified areas. Does it take one of those two things in order to turn around the desertification, or is there some notion you might have that would allow us to get some planetary cooling by rolling back desert?
This in the grazing situation, this takes the animals. You need the disturbance on the soil in order to, it's controlled disturbance. But you need the impact of those hooves in this system, and you need the deposition of dung at spacing like 1 per square meter. And they need to be able to trample that biomass that's there and get it in. If you're coming from extremely desertified, then they use a technique where they will, like I think it was talking to Seth, that they will bed these animals in a certain place for about a week. So they would come in, they would chew their cud, they would deposit their dung, and then they would move the bedding area to another. And this would start to restore some of these areas. So it's bringing back in the biology through the dung and the saliva and the urine, and having those food resources or carbon resources available for those soil microbes. That's what starts to rebuild this whole thing. You have to have the microbes there in order to fix the nitrogen that's necessary for the system in order to capture the carbon. So it is a system that you're bringing back, and it is the disruption from the hooves of the cattle, like in how the bison did in the Great Plains.
If I could add to that, and I apologize if you said it already, David, something I learned fairly recently. I'd always known that manure is important for the minerals, the moisture, the bacteria, but I did not realize that the gut of the rumen of the bovine is also a rich source of fungi as well. And what does degraded soil need more than anything else in the world? Moisture and fungi. So it's absolutely perfect, exactly what the degraded soil needs.
And let me add one thing to that. You have to have cattle that haven't been wormed for over the last 3 years, because if they still have that in their system, they kill the dung beetles, and the dung beetles are critical to getting that manure back into the ground to compost in place. So that's another thing you have to watch out for.
So the ivermectin is effective for 3 years.
That's what we were seeing. We had a pecan farmer here that has been doing this grazing in between his pecan trees, and he noticed it took him 3 years to get the dung beetles back. So his cattle, not treating them.
If I could add a personal point here, as an undergraduate at Wesleyan, I had the honor of having a professor, Dr. Max Tischler, a legendary organic chemist who had developed a stable form of penicillin during World War II that had profound implications. And Dr. Tischler also in the early 1970s helped to bring ivermectin to market. So it's great to have a personal connection with someone who developed a Nobel Prize winning drug.
Yeah, it's a great drug, but it's just really hard on dung beetles.
They don't like it so much.
Yeah, and density is the other key. Having the right density of cattle to have that impact and get off of it. and be able to get off of it for about a year. So that system can rebuild and rest. It doesn't take as long later, but in the very beginning of the year, or a little over for that area, so it can recuperate.
So Peter Byck, your colleague, has indicated that there are quite a few more papers coming out on this research, and I was wondering if you can say something about what that research will be looking at.
Oh, it was a full systems analysis. It covered just about everything. It covered the birds, covered insects, covered cattle health, farmer welfare and well-being, socioeconomics. As I say, it's a complete systems analysis of these 5 pairs of ranges. You're on mute, Carl. Sorry.
Henry, did you have anything else you want to say? Otherwise, we can drop your camera.
Did I answer all your questions, Henry?
I'm sorry, he's muted. I beg your pardon. Sorry, Henry.
There we go. Yeah, let me just ask one follow-up question to
Okay.
put this in practical terms that a farmer might be able to think about. If you're building a Johnson-Su reactor to create inoculant for your farm, how many of those reactors do you need for how many acres of land that you want to inoculate?
Good question. It will depend first on the quality, how well you did on the system. And I'm trying to work on an analysis method that's inexpensive, that we can find that out. Next, we normally put it out at 2 pounds per acre. One bioreactor, it'll take about 2,000 pounds of raw material, wet raw material to fill it. You end up with about 700 pounds. So 12 months later, and that will give you about 350 acres worth.
Wow.
And what we see in the extract made from this compost, we'll see about 4 to 5 million fungal spores and about 10 to 12 million bacterial cysts put out per square foot of soil. So that's roughly what we're seeing. And it doesn't take a lot. In the Haggertys in Australia, now they do a seed coating, which doesn't take very much. It's about a pound per acre. And they also do an injection when they plant. And I think they follow up with a foliar spray at about 3 weeks on the barley. So they're applying it 3 times, but I'd say, it depends. Quality is the biggest issue, that you have a good quality product to be able to make an extract out of, and then being able to get into the furrow. Right now, it seems to be the best, although we've seen some very strange results in Australia where one rancher sprayed it on his pasture. He had sprayed it on one side of a chestnut tree. And the side, he couldn't spray it on other because there was a branch that was too low for him to drive under. But on one side of the tree, you saw it leaf out a full month ahead of the rest of the tree. It looked like a tree without a trunk out there. And the chestnuts on that side of the tree where he had sprayed the extract were twice the size of the chestnuts on the other side of the tree. So there's a lot we don't know about this. Maybe you can spray it on the pasture. We've seen people very happy, especially that particular rancher. He noticed, where he turned around, where it was a little heavier, the cattle would graze that first, and then they wouldn't graze where it wasn't sprayed. Just different things like that.
I brought seed in from New Zealand back in the early 1980s. That was coated seed to spread on very poor ground in Vermont, and got good results from it. And that wasn't doing this full complex that you've been shedding light on, and just enormous impact.
What was it
Anyone coating seed in the United States?
Oh, as far as commercially?
Yes.
Not that I know of. this is so inexpensive for you to do. It's about 25 to 50 cents an acre for the material for you.
Beautiful.
So we're trying to make it available to everybody so they can do it themselves.
Yep.
Because, it is more profitable. We're seeing $150 to $180 an acre more profit in these systems that have been treated. You're getting away from the nitrogen, so you don't have that issue. The transition will probably take about 5 years, but you're profitable from what we've seen so far in the first year. You're more profitable. So you do need to come in with an initial cover crop. You need to start rebuilding that soil. A multi-species. We highly recommend legume heavy at this point to start to restore the nitrogen in that system. But it's then you'd follow with your row crop after that. You would roll that down and plant into it. And that allows you to both initially get the more carbon in your soil, more nitrogen, get the biology in the system working for you. You come in with that commodity crop and, excuse me, and it responds immediately. So it's a system that you can do. And it doesn't take, it takes a little effort to build a reactor. I'll be straight honest with you, but it doesn't take a lot of the compost to get the job done.
David, just for reference, you mentioned your approach cost approximately 25 to 50 cents per acre. How much would farmers typically spend on applying nitrogen fertilizer per acre?
This year?
Quite a bit more than that, I'm guessing.
That was over 90 cents a pound, I think, this year. And they usually put 125 to 180 pounds of nitrogen per acre. In some cases, like here in our valley, they're putting 400 pounds of nitrogen per acre on pecan trees.
Wow.
It's, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money out of your pocket for something that, number one, most of it's going to go into the atmosphere.
That's why my pecan pies cost so much to make.
Henry, did that help?
Yes, that is excellent. And
Okay.
I guess it's up to us farmers to probe each other and say, hey, get going.
Yeah, I recommend to work together with a group of farmers, and everybody can try something different, and everybody can benefit from each other's efforts. It's working as a community, just like the microbes do. And it's so much more effective, and you'll get things done as a community or a quorum that you won't get done as an individual. You need all eyes on this because it's going to be different everywhere. The experience, what you need to follow up with, how you need to follow nature. It's not a press the button and get it done. It's not where you give a list of things. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. It's not that way. Nature's not that way. It's all adaptive. It's all observant in this.
So how about coming back to Seth's question of how do we get the government, the legislature, public opinion taking hold of this and running with it?
Well, I think if you're a farmer and you know you're going to make more profit, they're going to follow you. Government's never led that I've seen. They're always followers. And if you're going to make more money on this, if you're going to improve your soils, so when you pass them on to your children, you're not passing a problem, but you're passing a rich, fertile, profitable system to them. You can't beat that. The rest of it will follow. As long as the money end all this is positive, farmers will adopt this. It's a no-brainer if you're going to make more money.
Henry, thank you for that question. I'd like to move on to some other questions that have come in, but Henry, thank you for being here. And I just want to say that Henry is a colleague of ours in Vermont, and I'm seeing there's another Vermonter in the group here. And isn't that wonderful? We're a global community, and there's a high representation of people from the state of Vermont in this forum right now. So let's hear it for the Green Mountain State, and that makes me happy. Makes me happy. Soil4Climate is, Vermont incorporated organization. And maybe we'll get you up there sometime, Dr. Johnson. Okay, and speaking of which, so there's a question from Jim Stiles. He says, I'm doing a small Johnson-Su reactor, 20-gallon fabric pots, so that I can move them into my cellar in the winter. One winter so far. Suggestions, ? Concerns, ?
Sounds like he's doing great. If the worms are happy, that's the key to this.
I love that statement, if the worms are happy. Okay, and then I just kind of want to move quick now because of the time. Farmer Peppy says there's a product called BioWorma. And Farmer Peppy says BioWorma is the ultimate dewormer to use for replacement. I don't know what she means by does that replacement of ivermectin? I'm not sure what that means there.
Well, if not that, you can always plant plantains, and the cattle graze, those are actually dewormer plants. And the cattle will go eat what they need. They're smart.
Okay, that's fascinating. I hadn't heard that before. And I saw Carl kind of raise his eyebrows. I don't think he'd heard that before. Fascinating. So then also in the spirit of just sort of trying to move on, the situation now in the Netherlands is sort of a prime example of, how not to do it. So yes, nitrogen is a problem, but then just this edict comes down saying, okay, well, now you have to stop. But their production demands haven't stopped or slowed down, and there wasn't, and there are suggestions that this is just part of a plan to put them out of business, to get the land for other purposes, and who knows whether or not that's true, but clearly there's a major problem. I mean, it's not like the farmers just love putting on nitrogen. They're doing it because they need to, because they have to meet certain quotas, and there's a financial incentive. So
if they don't, they're not profitable.
You're right. So these types of things have to be transitioned. There needs to be a plan, and the regenerative grazing and the proper crop rotation and the Johnson-Su bioreactor, that all needs to be part of the tool set of a transition. And really, it should take a decade. This should be like a 10-year transition. And this should be part of policy. And this, I had got my policy hat on, and, the UN climate conference is coming up in November, which I want to go to and get regenerative ag into that. So do you have any thoughts about this from sort of a policy perspective? Well, I know you just said, well, you just have to do it, but I mean, even more specifically at the USDA or at the international, level, with the various NGOs, and then something, something like the Netherlands example. How do we put together a toolkit, a roadmap that shows a realistic gradual transition, not just an edict that comes down and says, okay, you have to stop nitrogen?
Well, a lot of it is having the data. And in agriculture, it takes at least 5 years to get any kind of data that will actually give you a good path forward. That's the reason that we chose farms that had been AMP grazing farms that had been practicing a minimum of a decade before we did the experiment out there in the Southeast. And funny thing, but if you look at the number of years that the AMP farmers had been practicing AMP, they correlated very closely with the forage production on that soil. The longer the practice, the higher the forage productivity. So it's a system that is increasing efficiency along the whole pathway. So it's, but I still think that if a farmer can commit, at least try it on a small area on their soil or on their farm, and come in and observe it and see. Don't do the whole thing at one time. But come in, you can actually transition to reduce 85% in 3 years. You can do it actually the first year if you come in with that cover crop and the inoculation, at least from what we've observed.
Okay, well, listen, that's good advice. I like what you just said. You need data, you know, and thank God for people like you are getting the data. Listen, 3 more questions have come in. It would be great if we could get to them and still end on time. I know we started a few minutes late. Can you, Dr. Johnson, can you see the questions there in Zoom at the bottom? See where it says Q&A, or I can read them to you.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see, my question is, how do we see profitability from this model? Is that the first one?
That's the first one, yeah.
You'll see profitability because you're reducing your input costs. You will be able to produce it almost as much crop as you did before. Eventually, you'll be able to do more, like Russell Hedrick. You know, he's a decade into it, and he's 68% more productive, using 80% less fertilizer. So, you know, if you can get the carbon credits, that'll be great. That would be a good bonus for the farmers. But number one, they're not going to do this unless it's more profitable at the beginning. They can't take the risk, and that's why we're trying to. If you can bring the biology back into the system, you can start to see results very quickly. Well, see, is there a way to measure the nitrogen that is expelled in the atmosphere? Yeah, there are ways to measure nitrogen. The Met towers are one. You can see what you applied, what you pulled out as a crop, what went into your soil, and do just simple math. You can figure, well, about 60% of that went into the atmosphere, and up to 80% from what I read of nitrogen you apply get lost directly to the atmosphere. And let's see, have you inoculated biochar with? Yeah, some people have. I don't know what the results were, but biochar could be a good carrier to get it in, but injecting into the furrow, the liquid extract seems to be the best. You know, the seed contact, it needs to, you know, this is my assistant researcher here. She's saying seed contact, and she's right. It does need to be in contact with the seed and the soil from what we've seen.
Yeah, from what we have seen, it's very important to have a seed contact when you're injecting the extract into the furrow when you plant the seeds. And or if you already have living roots, then you can spray the extract onto your pasture, because then you have the living roots to cooperate and collaborate with those microbes. So those are very important. Think about if we are in a living biological system, things are living, and how we collaborate together. We need to be in the relatively distance that we are able to collaborate. So, and one of the other questions there about how do we access those the land? I don't know, a lot of cooperation, like with the Soil4Climate, that I know you do have a massive contact and connection, and then with other organizations too. And then also Western Landowners Alliance and Kuvera Coalition, also Understanding Ag, all those organizations, they either have a large contact with the ranchers or with the farmers. And most people that they know, they are the practitioners. So able to talk to those people to give you insight about what challenges policy-wise or on the ground, and then they can give you a more cohesive picture of maybe there is a path forward what we need to approach.
Okay, well, it's 4:02, so I guess we're at the stopping point. We won't take any more questions, just some closing comments. I guess I'll start, and then maybe Carl, and then David, you could have the last comment. I just want to thank you again so much for being part of the Soil4Climate 5th anniversary activities. Oh, you know what? I do want to put in a pitch for Soil4Climate fundraising. You know, we're a small nonprofit. We're trying to do a lot. And most of the money we raise actually goes to our Kenya project. You know, we're working with the Maasai in Kenya and Tanzania. We've done training in holistic management for them at the Mara Training Center in West Kenya. We've done infrastructure support, a new corral, a water point, a bull, cows, feed because of the drought. Unfortunately, the last 2 years have been just horrifying between COVID and the drought. So we've had to provide support for feed. You've seen pictures of all those dying animals. So, you know, it takes time to restore land. Just because you took the course and you know, you've got 100 cows, you're in a dry area like Kenya and Tanzania, the land doesn't just come back overnight. If all of a sudden the world's worst drought hits you, you're going to get devastated. So we need continuous support. Please donate to Soil4Climate. It's easy enough to do if you want to. There's lots of links on our website, on Facebook. You know, you can start your own fundraiser. We're recognized as a nonprofit through Facebook. So please, we would greatly appreciate that. All right, David, thank you so much. Carl, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I would just recommend to everybody watching this to check out David Johnson's videos on YouTube. They're an endless source of information, particularly the talk he gave at the Living Soil Symposium. I thought was truly one of the most outstanding talks I've ever seen. David weaves together the entire history of the evolution of the planet, and it's absolutely masterful. So that's it. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you for the opportunity to share this. You know, it's something that we really want to see it work on the planet. We see a lot of farmers struggling and ranchers, and we see this as a potential pathway that they can start to become more profitable, be able to pass something on to their children that they'd be proud of instead of be ashamed to pass along. This can be done, and a lot of people are doing it. So thank you again for the opportunity, and again, happy anniversary.
Thank you so much. Okay, all right, we'll say goodbye and we'll end now. You can all wave.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.